Welcome everyone to our June Digital Community Power Hour on using data to tell your story with Nikki Kelley and Abbi Crowe. My name is Amy Charlton. I'm going to cover a few housekeeping items to get us started. We are so glad to have them here with us today for you to be able to have access to these experts live. And so we want to let you know how to ask questions. On your panel on the right, if you look towards the bottom area, there is a section called questions. If you click on the arrow to expand that, that's where you'll type in the questions that you have. There's two facilitators on the line who will help surface those questions for Nikki and Abbi to make sure your questions get answered. You can ask questions all throughout, and we will look for opportunities to pause our speakers to bring those to the surface, and then we'll probably also have time at the end. Today we're also going to do some polls, and it's pretty easy. Once we kick those off, it'll kind of take over your screen. You'll quickly select your vote, and then we'll be set to go. So we're going to get started and kicking things off with Abbi. Thanks, everyone.
Hi there. So we're going to go ahead and get started with some intros. I'll let Nikki do her intro first, and then I'll go since I'll be starting the first section of the meeting.
Great, thanks, Abbi. Hi, everyone. My name is Nikki Kelley. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and I've been with Best Friends since 2013. I'm the manager of network strategy, and our team does a lot of the support around the network partner program. So we do all the data, we do the grant program, and also digital resources for our network partners. And I'm really excited to talk with you today about what I think is one of my favorite parts of my job, and that's working with shelter data to identify strengths and also gaps in programs to potentially increase life saving.
And I'm Abbi Crowe. I'm the data specialist for the network, and I've been with Best Friends for about 2.5 years. I do a little bit of everything from onboarding the new network partners, so actually getting the data that we ask for when new partners apply. I manage our coalition in Shelter Animals Count, so I deal a lot with the data that people are entering into Shelter Animals Count. I also do some work with the kind of the larger projects we have ongoing to collect shelter stats around the country, and also some data related to community CATS programs. So the first thing we're going to touch base on is just kind of what we're going to go through today. We're going to take a look at the National Life Saving Progress Maps that we have on the Best Friends website to kind of show what the overall picture is for the country and how we arrived at those numbers. And then we're going to go into a little bit of just briefly touch on some frequently asked questions related to entering data into Shelter Animals Count, which is where a lot of the information that we are currently using for the national maps comes from, and a little bit on the coalition builder that's in Shelter Animals Count. And then we're going to actually go into a little bit deeper into the Shelter Animals Count, the data dashboards, where you can actually see the data itself. So you can actually look at information at a community level and how you would be able to identify useful information from your community to kind of go back and determine what sort of programming may be needed in your area. And then we're going to dig in even deeper into how you can use that information that you've identified, see what sort of gaps are that you currently have in your area, and then how you might be able to develop goals and programs to actually be able to save more lives in your area. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump into the national map that's on the Best Friends website, which many people have probably seen this. We've been sharing it out, and this is a map that it currently has 2016 data for the most part. There is a little bit of older data in it. But what we did with this particular map is we currently have our programming focused by regions around the country, so 8 different regions. And within those regions, we tried to collect as much real data as possible. And then for the areas where we were not able to obtain actual data from shelters, then we did estimates based on population in the surrounding areas. So these particular map, you can see the overall picture of kind of where we think we are as the country at a 70% save rate, the total intakes of dogs and cats coming into the shelters, how much of the actual intakes are known, and then how much of the deaths that were estimated. And this particular map, you can look at it by region to see the overall rates, and then you can also dig in a little deeper into a particular region and see the current save rate for each state, as well as how much of the information was known versus estimated. And you'll see that for some of these states, Alabama and Mississippi are two where we really just did not have a lot of information to be able to, it's mostly estimated data. We're hoping to improve that over time, and that's kind of one of the big reasons why we need data. We need some sort of central system and a consistent way of tracking information. Some states are much better than others. Florida, we did have all of the data available. Virginia and North Carolina are two states that have mandatory shelter reporting. So those are two that we truly have a good picture of what's going on. But in some of these areas, we don't, because so much was estimated, even though we are comfortable with our estimates. Within these maps, too, you can dig in even a little bit deeper to see how much was estimated, the areas that were estimated versus the areas that were known information. I'll wait for it to load. So you can see that, roughly half of the information was estimated, half of it was known. And if we look at a particular state, we can see of the actual known data, the 19% that was known, the different areas that came from and how much in each county was known versus estimated. And so this gives us the overall, the big picture of kind of what's going on around the country. But, in many cases, we want to really look at what's going on in our particular area. So switch back to the PowerPoint. And so the next thing we're going to dig into is shelter animals count, which is, hopefully everyone is familiar with shelter animals count and is entering their monthly data into their system. It's the national database that we're trying to get consistent reporting, get as many rescues and shelters on board as we can to start reporting their information into the system that really allows us to get a true understanding of what's going on instead of just estimating different areas. The two things I wanted to point out for basics on shelter animals count, there are many great tools available already on their website. I frequently get a couple of questions that seem to pop up a lot, and the answers are already on Shelter Animals Count. If you go into their tools and resources page under the Get Involved, the first one I want to point out is the PDF that they have of the basic data matrix. This answers a lot of the questions that seem to come up frequently as far as entering the monthly data into the system. Particularly how to enter by age, because they do have the breakdown of being able to enter data by adult dogs, puppies, adult cats, and kittens, or you can do an age unknown if you don't have those breakdowns. The breakdowns are very useful as we get into further detail of trying to see really what's going on in the community. So we try to encourage people to do the age breakdowns if possible. But then some people get a little bit confused on, if when they enter the information, and it's a puppy, when it comes into the system, how are they supposed to enter that going out? And it is the age at intake is how you enter the intake of that particular animal, and then the age at the outcome is how you enter the outcome. So if they age out of the category going from puppy to adult, that's fine. You would just, when you count their outcome, it would be in the adult category. The second question that seems to come up a lot is TNR groups and whether or not they should be reporting that information into Shelter Animals Count. So actual just TNR, if it's just TNR work where you're actively going out to trap those cats for the purpose of sterilizing them and putting them back into their colonies, that information is not being tracked in Shelter Animals Count. However, if it is a cat that's entering the shelter system and then being returned to the field, those are being included. So return to field outcomes are being included. Strictly TNR work is not. The other thing I wanted to quickly touch base on, close out of this, is if you are using a shelter software system and you're having trouble getting the information monthly to be able to enter your monthly information, there are links in here already of how to set up a report from the largest shelter software systems to be able to easily get that monthly report so you can enter the information into shelter animals count. And then the other thing to touch base on quickly is the coalition tool. So for the Best Friends Network, we have created a Best Friends Network coalition, and hopefully everybody has opted into that coalition that we have. That allows us to have real-time access to the information that you're entering. So if you accept our coalition invite, we can then run a report aggregate for all of our network partners to see intakes and outcomes and all of the information you're reporting. We can also export out a report. Anybody can set up a coalition for their particular area. So if you want to set one up for your community or your state, the coalition builder tool is available to be able to create new coalitions in the system. And then with that, I think we're going to go ahead and launch the first poll, and we're going to go into a little bit more detail on the actual data set itself.
All right, so for our first poll, we wanted to ask you guys, do you currently view or use the public data dashboards on Shelter Animals Count? All right, we've got about half of you have turned in your votes so far. It's looking like we got a good mix. So about 30% said, no, I didn't know they existed. 30% said, no, I know about them, but I'm not sure how to use them. And then 40% look at them from time to time. So not a lot of use in this group on frequently using them to inform operations. All right. Thank you, Amy. Can we switch back over to Abby? Thank you. Abby's going to walk you through an example of how she used one of the dashboards to identify what's going on in her community. But I want to just give you a brief intro into each of the 5 views on these dashboards with a little bit of insight in how you might be able to use it to inform your programming. And there's currently 5 dashboards available to the public that summarize all of the information available in Shelter Animals Count from 2011 through 2017. I will note here that these are a work in progress. We are always looking for feedback on these to inform future versions, because the point is for them to be useful for you and for you to be able to find all the data you need to make smart program decisions. And I guess before I move forward, I want to clarify one thing. I think people, when we go to conferences and things, we sense a certain level of confusion, because I'm saying we, and I'm talking about Shelter Animals Count, but I work for Best Friends. So we get the question a lot, is there one agency who owns Shelter Animals Count? And we always like to clarify that it's actually a lot of different agencies that came together to form a completely separate entity. So the board of Shelter Animals Count, it includes representatives from PetSmart Charities and the ASPCA and Maddie's Fund and Best Friends. So it's really an amazing space in our industry where it's neutral ground. All these people have come together with the sole mission of collecting and sharing this information so we can all do our jobs better. So if you hear me say we, not talking from Best Friends perspective, I've done some help on these dashboards for the Shelter Animals Count board. So that's where that's coming from. All right, the first one is right when you go. So Abby, can you show them how to get here from the website?
Yes. Yeah. I'll go back to just the main website first. And then it's under data and explore the data.
Thank you. And it takes a second to load. Usually it'll be even more because we're sharing our screen. It's trying to access a lot of data, so it takes a second to load for some of these. The home tab shows data snapshot at a glance. It's a really quick summary level view. A couple terms that I think are helpful to know when you're digging into this data. We have the concept of full versus partial data sets you'll see flowing throughout. And let's say you're looking at 2017. If you're selecting to look at full data sets only, the data is going to filter just for those organizations that turned in all 12 months worth of data. So you can also flip to see anyone who turned in partial, or you can just look at everything that's in the database. Another term that I think the concept isn't necessarily new, but it's new to Shelter Animals Count and the dashboards, I think, and it's gross versus net intakes and live outcomes. And you'll see those two split separately on all the dashboards. Gross is all the intakes. It's all live intakes from all 5 categories in the data matrix. And then net, all that does is take out transfers. So we're not double counting an animal between 2 organizations. Because obviously, if you're trying to aggregate community data or state level, you want to view into taking out those transfers so you're not double counting them across the board. All right, the summary tab, the home tab is really just to give you a brief snapshot. The summary should look pretty familiar. It's laid out exactly like the basic data matrix. And the point with this one is full transparency into all the data for anyone who's opted into transparency. You can use the right side filters to select a date range, look at certain states, filter down by community, which for the most part, community is wrapped up by county. There's a handful of situations where it's wrapped up by metropolitan area. You can look at just organizations of certain types, and all of these filters have search bars as well. So if you're looking at the organization name list and it's 2,800 organizations long, you can type in to search for an organization. And I know there's a lot of second chances in the world, so each of them is appended by what state they're in as well. So this is really useful. You can see down below as well for the organizations represented in the matrix above, based on your filter choices, it says which months they've turned in of that time frame. It's probably reloading on its own. Yeah. Thanks, Abby. And then let's move to the next one. The comparison, I think, could be really helpful. It's based off of looking at groups of similar intake and demographic factors as yours. So the key here is if you want to find other shelters or rescues that are similar, so maybe you can connect on different programs or challenges you might face that might have the same solutions. And you start by typing in your organization's intake level, and then it's going to filter all the information below for groups that are within 10% of your intake. So if you take in 1,000, it's going to show you groups that take in between 900 and 1,100 dogs and cats. And then there's some demographic filters as well if you want to find those in communities of similar size or other demographic factors. And then the geographic is another way, like the comparisons really to find groups that are similar, and then geographic should help you find any groups based on location. And you start by picking a state, and then a detailed map pops up with communities and organizations, and you can zoom in and out from there and click on the map and select certain groups and see a summary of their data. So all of these are really designed just to give you different ways to find the information, but it's all summarizing the exact same information. And then quickly, the last one is the timeline. This will show you intakes and outcomes over time. The filters are exactly the same as the other dashboards where you pick communities or organizations to summarize. And then by year, you can see how their intakes and outcomes trend over that year. And that's it. Now, Abby's going to walk you through an example with the summary of how she looked at her community.
Yep, so as soon as this finishes loading, I'll switch back over here to the summary view. And I'm going to use my particular area. So I live in Pennsylvania, and the actual county where I live, the shelters are not transparent with their data. They've been very reluctant to become transparent with their information. And so while their information is not in here, I'm familiar with other communities just, it's actually bordering our area that are participating in Shelter Animals Count. And so this is kind of one of the ways that I have used this information of the kind of the similar organizations in that I know of that are kind of comparable to my particular area, and how I can take that information, kind of show it to, the shelter representatives as well, to see like, hey, we're not all alone, kind of we all have the same issues, and also kind of show how as a community we need to kind of be talking about these issues instead of it being something that everyone's very afraid of talking about as well. I know in our particular area, everyone thinks the shelter is just an awful place and nothing that goes in comes out alive, which is not actually true. It's just that they are reluctant of, the current challenges that they're facing to be able to share that information. And there's also a lot of misconceptions in our particular area of, I think, what population is the most at risk. And I'll kind of talk about that a little bit more as I go into it. So I'm going to first filter the summary dashboard to Pennsylvania. Maybe. Okay, and so you can already see that the information at the top has now filtered down to Pennsylvania. So in Pennsylvania, there's only 66 organizations that are represented, which is small for as large as the state is. So hopefully we can keep increasing that number. First, I want to look at my particular area where I live in the county. So if I select it just for the county itself, I already know that there's not much. There's only 2 organizations. If I go down here, it's 2 small rescue organizations, so they're taking in a very small number of animals. And, there's not necessarily, it's useful information to see who's participating, but I couldn't really use this to be able to identify too much of, how can this particular data help influence, decisions and what sort of programming we may need in our area. So now I'm going to expand it a little bit further. We're very close to the Maryland border. So I'm going to include Maryland. And actually take off the Franklin County filter. So now I have the 2 states selected, which it says up there, and I'm going to actually just select the particular counties that I want to have included in the mix. So I have 3 counties. I forgot one. I want to also include Adams County. So that takes me now, I'm up to 9 organizations, and I definitely have more intakes overall into the overall picture. And I can look down here and see kind of which organizations are represented. And, just from living in this particular area, I'm familiar with most of these organizations, so I kind of know what kind of animals they're taking in, and I have just a general sense that they are similar to my particular area. And how I can use this particular information, so we can see, dogs coming in. So we have, roughly there were 3,000 dogs that came in, and for my time period, which was set to 2017. And I can see that as far as euthanasia numbers, it was 213. So, overall, there's still dogs dying in the shelters, but it's not a large percentage compared to the overall intake. And we can calculate a save rate on that by taking our intakes minus our total other outcomes and then dividing that by the total intakes. So that actually comes out to, for dogs, it's an 86% save rate for this kind of community level that I'm looking at. And another thing to note is this particular transferred in line, even if I take out the organizations that I know are kind of the rescues in this set of organizations, my transferred in number is still, it's not like a large percentage, but there are still transfers coming in. And I know just kind of from working with these organizations as well that we're actually transferring in dogs from out of state. So they're transfers in from out of this county as well into the open admission shelters in our area. It's not a large percentage, but there's still dogs coming in. So this percentage of other outcomes, this doesn't give us, kind of why are they dying in a particular shelter, but it opens that conversation of there's a smaller percentage that are dying. What sort of, that might open a conversation of, is it medical needs for the particular dogs? Is it behavioral issues, for this smaller subset of animals that are still dying? Cats, on the other hand, are a little bit of a different story in our particular area. So if we look at the total cats coming in, there were 8,000 cats. More than 2,600 were not leaving the shelter systems alive. So it's a much lower save rate overall. And if we kind of dig into it a little deeper, we can see the number of strays and owner surrenders are actually kind of similar. It looks like we have, some organizations that are not breaking down the age, which makes it a little bit more difficult to do a complete comparison. But when I look at just the information that I do have by age and do the save rate of the intakes minus our total other outcomes divided by the intakes, the adult cats have a 60% save rate, while the kittens in this mix have 82% save rate. So that sounds like it's more adult cats that are the issue, although we don't exactly know what this breakdown is of the age unknown. Is it adults? Is it kittens that are dying in that particular shelter? And so this kind of just gives me that general sense of, so it seems like we need programming more on the cat side, and we need to open maybe that communication up with our community to really see, like, these are the cats coming into the system. What can we do to actually be able to create programming to get them back out alive instead of not talking about it? And instead, let's work together with all the different rescues and community organizations that we have. Let's come together and, figure out different solutions that we may be able to work together on. And so I think that's it for the summary. So I will go ahead and switch it to you, Nikki, for the rest of the presentation.
Sounds good. Can you guys see my PowerPoint?
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you.
We can see it.
Great. All right, thanks for showing that example, Abby. And I think what she walks through is probably what a lot of you guys do all the time. You kind of look at things, you feel your gut, you dip your toe in testing that with data, and then you kind of move on with those assumptions. So we're going to take that piece of it and go one step further and talk about a true in-depth gap analysis process, because the title of this is how to tell your story using data. And I think really from our perspective, a lot of the ways we've had success communicating with the community and engaging them in our mission and what we want to do, the best way to tell our story is by using data to share what's going on, give them some good charts and snapshots, to share what our goals are and our timelines are, share progress toward those goals. That's the best way we found to engage our community and to tell our story. So we're going to talk a little bit about the process that goes in, what you need to look at in order to set those goals, to then really publicly engage your community in the solutions. Before we do that, I want to jump. Amy, can you pull up poll number 2? I just want to get a sense from everyone what the average annual intake is of your organization, because that might kind of steer how we chat about some of this stuff. Again, we're getting a good mix. About half of you have voted so far. Okay, great. We've got plenty of big groups, 1,000+ intakes, some smaller groups. Good, we've got a great mix. I think that'll be helpful for the conversation. All right, Amy, thank you. Well, and obviously, depending on the size of your organization and its mission, you're going to use data in different ways, but obviously the key here is that it's important, and we really can't be as effective as we want to be without using it. We're all undoubtedly unbelievably busy every day, and a lot of our day is dictated by what happens to walk in the door. But I think we can end up spending a lot of time and energy on what are truly really great programs, but they aren't always helping us achieve our mission, because we're kind of being reactive to what's coming in as opposed to proactive to really laser targeting what we want to get accomplished. So for the context of what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to use Best Friends and our mission. And our goal is to reduce shelter deaths across the country, which Abby showed you our national maps and how we're visualizing and telling that story. And when we do a gap analysis for a community, or when we're working with one of our shelter partners to identify what the needs are in their community, that's what we focus on. How do we help you reduce shelter deaths? And we realize that we have to have a holistic view when we're working on gathering the data. No issue is isolated in a shelter. Every issue is a truly community issue, and you need your organization, but also everyone else's data in order to form a truly strategic collaborative solution. So when we're looking and first entering a community, we try to get an idea of where the animal's dying, what's going on in the municipal facilities and the large sheltering facilities. And I know for some communities, that information can actually be really hard to get. We talked already about shelter animals count. That could be a good place to start looking. Obviously, it's always a good idea to try to form a relationship with your shelter and hopefully gain the trust to so they'll share that information with you. And a lot of times, like Abby said, it's helpful to sit down together and look at the data side by side, because you learn a lot just talking through it as a team. There are a handful of states also, like she mentioned, that have state level reporting, like the Department of Agriculture or someone will require it. So just in case, check that out as well. But in addition to just intakes, outcomes, what's going on in the community, you also need to know what support exists both for the shelter and for the community. So what organizations are actively transferring animals out of the municipal shelter facilities? What spay and neuter resources are available? What wellness, what resources for people to be able to be responsible pet owners exist? Is there enough of that in the community? Are there some deserts, some gaps where where people don't have access to what they need to be successful pet owners? So all of this is just sort of your beginnings of collecting a lot of the information you need to then take it one step further and dive deep, which I think a lot of people do step one and they look at summary level data and they get a sense, but taking it to the deeper level is really what is going to be critical in creating highly impactful programs. So let me click. All right, so when I'm saying deep dive, a lot of you guys probably do this already. A lot of the attendees, it looks like, have organizations that take in a large amount of animals. So this might even be something you're doing with your own data. But when we ask people to dig deep on understanding what's happening in community, a lot of times we're talking about looking at intakes by zip code, because you'll want to target your programs to where the animals are coming from. We're also asking to look at reasons for surrender. A lot of times something will bubble up as to, oh, you know what, people are having to surrender their animal because they don't have access to the medical care they need, or because pet-friendly housing is a huge issue for the community. So looking at it, slicing it by reason for surrender, a lot of times can bubble up an issue. It's also helpful to look at reasons for euthanasia. That one's kind of a no-brainer, but looking at, if you're trying to target the animals that are dying, look exactly at which animals aren't making it out and why, and then forming very specific targeted solutions to that. These last two are things that we just see over and over again in a lot of communities. It seems like almost it's not even necessarily regional issues all the time. Like neonate kittens and big dogs are just two populations in our shelters that really need a lot of support. So it's good to look at how many of those cat intakes are neonates in less than 8 weeks, and then how many of the dogs coming into the shelter fall in that big dog category. And I think that conversation used to be a lot more about pit bull type dogs, and it's kind of shifting as new research comes out about our ability to properly identify dogs, and we just need solutions right now. A lot of shelters have a lot of great, fantastic big dogs that are just kind of sitting there. I want to pause really quick and do another poll, if that's okay, Amy. Poll 3. I want to know what level of data you all feel like you can regularly access and easily access. And this is sort of for your entire community. All right, we got a couple votes coming in. Okay. Great. So a good chunk are saying that they can access their organization's data and their detailed information for themselves, but it's harder to get your hands on that community data. But a fair number of people can go a level further. That's great. And I think this is probably something that is going to be most helpful to develop solutions for this, for getting the data you need to actually talk to each other about it. So I encourage you to jump into the digital community and the post that we put on there about this power hour, or maybe start a new one together and talk about strategies for obtaining that data, because a lot of people in this meeting or elsewhere have probably spent a lot of time building the relationships they need to get this data, or know how to mine their shelter software the right way to get it. So I encourage you guys to connect with each other and find out ways you can access this information. Great, thanks, Amy. And that's really kind of the first step, is gathering the data, doing the high level sweep, what's going on, then using that to kind of hone in on what do we need to target and really dig deep. And then, like I said, for us, it's all about aggregate deaths. We're looking at, in that deep dive, where are these animals coming from, and which aren't making it out. And then the next step is determining what programs can help those animals. So I think a lot of the hard work is determining the exact population that's going to need the support, but then it's not always completely clear cut on what to do next. There's resource issues with a lot of programs. It might be obvious what you need to do next, but you don't have the resources to do it. Sometimes there's some external environment issues which make, implementing the right programs really challenging. One thing we're going to share with you after this is something that we put together for the conference last year. We did an interactive session on data, and it has 3 pieces. There's sort of a pre-session exercise, which walks you through doing some high-level scraping to find data. And then there's a more in-depth thing, well, now that you have the data, kind of dig around and see what you can get from it. And then the third piece is a decision tree worksheet, where you start by, okay, cats are my issue. Of cats, which of these 5 things is it? Is it neonate kittens? Okay, and it takes you down and it spits you out into recommended programs based on which populations you identify. So we'll share that afterwards. And again, jump in the community. It's the talking to each other is the best way to figure out what programs you need to address specific populations. And then another really important piece at this juncture is, even if you've identified the need and you've identified the programs, you cannot make any of these decisions in a silo. You have to look at what's already happening in your community that meets that need. Who can you talk to either join forces on a program, or outsource a solution, or divide and conquer a solution? Because I think we see it a lot in a lot of different communities, where people say, this is my mission, I'm going to tackle this, and they just kind of put their head down and go. When you find out there's 3 groups doing, I don't know, spay neuter services in one area, and there's a whole other half of the city that's not being addressed at all. So it's really important to look around and talk to each other and identify the programs together, and then collaboratively work towards a solution. And I'm really excited to talk to you guys about this, because again, it's something we see a lot. After you gather and analyze the data and you determine your programs, the third step, which I think really speaks to telling your story and getting the community involved, and that is creating goals around the programs that you've identified. And this is something that we see all the time in our grant program. We have people come to us and apply for what is actually a really great solution for their community, but they have a hard time translating that into, this is our goal, this is our end game, here's where we expect to be in 6 months, here's where we expect to be in 1 year, and this is how we're going to get to each of those milestones. So what I really encourage you guys to do when you're talking to people and trying to explain the work that you're doing and get them to buy into your mission, when you're applying for grants, when you're talking to funders, talk to them in terms of SMART goals. And I know this is something a lot of people have probably used before, but at Best Friends even, we bump up a lot of our goals against this all the time. And we make sure our goals fit this acronym of being specific. So we're saying one thing at a time. We're not kind of laying out every goal that we have, but each one has its own specific action item, that each goal is measurable. There has to be some sort of pass-fail component on it. We have to know whether or not we met it. We want our goals to be achievable. So you want to think about it in terms of, are you setting yourself up for failure with this goal, or within your existing resources and environment, is it actually achievable? Is it relevant? Meaning, is it really aligned with your mission? Because we kind of all get that mission drift a little bit, but is it critical to what we're trying to do? And then the last piece, which is really important, is to put a timeline on it. So for every goal you have, it should be specific. It should kind of be pass fail, and by this date is where we're going to see if we met that goal or not. And I think also it is really important. It's one thing to say, by this date, we want to go from a 30% save rate to a 90%, and that's 3 years from now. But you're never going to get there unless you set a 6-month, a 1 year, an 18-month. Like, you have to set milestones along the way, because otherwise, how else are you going to know if you're on track? And I think it's helpful to think about those SMART goal setting in terms of an example. So let's say that you analyze your data and you found that neonate kittens were the biggest need. And when you looked at the data, you realized that about half of your kittens were making it out alive, and you take in about 500 neonate kittens a year. Well, you know your end goal is to eventually bring that up, that 50% save rate up to a 90% save rate. And so I encourage you to think in terms of, if we implemented whatever solution you're talking about, whether it's an at-home foster program or a kitten nursery in your shelter, what feels feasible 6 months from now? And to just pick some numbers and try it out based on your existing resources. Does that feel like you could do it? So 6 months from now, you'll take in about a half a year's worth of kittens, so 250 kittens. Traditionally, with the 50% save rate, you would have saved about 125 of those. Do you feel like you could save just 50 more kittens within 6 months if you implemented this program? And if that feels right based on your current resources, set that goal and then look 1 year out. Well, maybe we can go from that milestone up to, within the first year, let's take our save rate all the way up to 75%. And then after you've had that year to refine, kind of realign and make sure you're staying on track, then your final year goal is to really perfect the program and get to that final benchmark of 90%. And I think, you can see the SMART principle playing out here. It's really specific. We're trying to get from 50 to 90%. It's measurable. We have milestones along the way. Based on current resources, it feels achievable, and there are time elements on each of these pieces. And we feel like when we are looking at grant applications, the groups that are able to tell their story in this way and really paint a path for us and show that they have a game plan and the resources to accomplish it in this manner, they've done the research, those are the people that we want to give money to. All right, one more poll, last point of engagement. I want to ask you guys, either based on gut or if you've had a chance to look at the data, what population do you feel like is most at risk in your community? Got a kittens, behavioral, medical, adult cats. Great, about half of you have voted. A lot of adult cats, yeah. Great, thank you so much. Now, my challenge is, after we talk today, to test that feeling. And like I said, some of that is probably based on data, but go back and dig into the data. Is this actually true? Is the most aggregate need you have in your community those animals, or is it really, are these based on perception? And if it does match with the data, then investigate programs that could fill that gap, set some SMART goals around improvements, even if you have to start small. I think it's important to recognize that even if you're talking about a minor change to a program or a shift, you can still set these SMART goals to help get to where you want to go. All right, I have a couple more points I want to mention because they were questions that popped up in the digital community when we said we were going to do this power hour. We should have a few minutes left, so if you guys have any questions burning in the back of your minds, feel free to pop them in the question slot. So the 2 points that came up, one was a really great question from Jazz Cat, is her digital community name, asking, they're a spay neuter intake prevention group. They really rely on grants and they have to prove an impact on the grants, but they can't link their efforts to intake reduction at the animal control agencies. again, something we see all the time. And what we talked about in the digital community and what we recommend to people a lot is, okay, well, if you feel like your efforts, they're having an impact, but they feel like a drop in the bucket because the community is so large, find a way to force your programming into not being a drop in the bucket. So just look at the zip code information, find out the high intake places, focus on that. If no one else is covering that zip code, really, really target it, hit it hard for an amount of time, and you should be able to see an impact on that zip code stats. Same for shelter populations. If you realize that it's big dogs from a couple zip codes that are really high intake, laser target your programs to that population and then only look at that data, and you'll be able to tell your story in terms of the data and the impact you're seeing. And I think by doing that too, you also step towards removing some of that duplication of effort among groups, because you're saying, okay, I'm going to really focus on these zip codes. You're obviously not going to do that if it's completely covered by someone else. So like we talked about, that scattershot approach of just, we're going to apply a relatively limited number of resources to a huge community is not going to have the same effect if you laser target on a smaller piece of it. And then the other question was from Kim, and it was about gathering and using length of stay information. And I just wanted to make the point that everything we talked about today can work in exactly the same fashion. If you look at length of stay exclusively as a metric, and you split it up into different shelter populations, so how long are big dogs staying, how long are senior dogs, how long are adult cats, then you can apply this same process to all of those. If you identify the pockets that are staying the longest, then you can set programs specifically for them and then watch how the length of stay changes over time and kind of use it as a tester to the different methods that you're implementing. If you want to set some SMART goals around it as well and say, we want to get length of stay down to this by this date, I think that's a really great way to test out because there's a lot of different advice out there on how to reduce length of stay, and you can kind of test and see what works best for your community. All right, and I have some kind of parting words for you all, but Amy, were there any questions that came in before we jump to that?
Yeah, there is. Tina Overgaard was wanting to know, with her local shelter, they've always had a consistent flow of surrendered working dogs like Great Pyrenees, Border Collies, etc. And she's just wondering if you have any recommendations of what kind of data collection could target and address the problem.
Yeah, so I could be wrong. I'm guessing you're in the South like me, because or maybe the rural South as well. I mean, if you're in a rural community and that's really like almost exclusively what you feel like the shelter's coming in, I would guess like just try to quantify that so you can tell the story better. If you can talk with the shelter and get them, it depends on obviously if they're using a system or, we still get a handful of shelters we contact every now and then that are, pencil and paper, their intakes and adoption information. You can still do it that way too. If you can quantify it, then I think you can start to develop a solution for it. Obviously with those types of breeds too, like a really strong transfer relationship might be important, but it's going to be hard to establish that without having the quantifiable information about it as well. Rural, oh, that's a hard word. Rural northern Utah. Okay. Thanks for that question. All right, well, thank you guys so much for joining us today. Just to kind of go through some key takeaways from what we talked about. Hope you left with a better understanding of some places you could look to gather information. You feel a little bit more comfortable with shelter animals count. Please jump onto network.bestfriends.org and check out some resources we have for you guys on some of those key programs we talked about. Also, the digital community is going to be your best friends in terms of talking with each other about developing some of these solutions, because I think we can provide a framework for gap analysis, but really it's about shelters working together to define the best solutions. Hope you learned a little bit about the process of gathering, analyzing, determining your programs, and then really importantly, setting SMART goals. That's just something we wanted to make sure you definitely leave with a strong sense of today. Also, this idea of not making any of your decisions in a vacuum, but really looking at the community as a whole, whatever your community may be, and talking with each other to develop collaborative solutions, because that's really going to be the only way that you create sustainable systemic change in your community. And then a quick note on the gap analysis process in general. Just remember that you're not going to go through it once and be like, okay, that's what we need to do. That's what our organization is now. Go. It's really designed to be iterative. So you go through it, you identify, okay, we have 2,000 cats to save. Let's all work together to figure out how to do that. Eventually, you're going to chip away at it and you're going to get your programs in place to do that. Those cats are taken care of. So you need to get used to going through this gap analysis process relatively frequently, because then it'll be time to peel the next layer back and hit, one step up in the low-hanging fruit. But always focus on what you can get the biggest impact on right away and then move up the chain. We'll be in touch. We'll send you some resources. Abby pulled together a lot of links to these things we were talking about. We have those resources from the conference next year. And we just encourage you to give it a shot. Look at your data, pick one category, set some SMART goals around it, use those to monitor and adjust, and hopefully you'll have some great successes to talk about. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Nikki and Abby. We appreciate you so much. I feel like this was so helpful to get some clear forward steps. And we hope that you guys will look for an email tomorrow. It'll come from Best Friends CP1 Community Programs, and it will come tomorrow. It's a follow-up email to all registrants for this webinar, and it will have the recording of this webinar, as well as the additional resources that we think will be helpful for you to be able to work on some of this stuff that Nikki and Abby have talked about today. We also will post things in the digital community related to this as well, and we hope some of you will join us there and talk about some of the things that you'd like to try. And we know with setting goals, as soon as we tell somebody else, then now we feel maybe like we're accountable, we're putting it out there. It's a lot more doable when we know that we've already told somebody about it. So that's kind of a proven statistic out there for lots of kinds of goals. Do we have any other questions in the last couple of minutes that haven't come in that we want to make sure get addressed through the chat, or even if someone else needs to add any other commentary? Abby, Nikki, did you have anything else that you wanted to add here at the end?
No, that's it. We've got our emails on the screen, so holler if you guys have any questions on anything.
Yes, feel free to shoot a message if you have any questions, and thank you everyone for joining.
Yes, and I do have another person asking about the recorded program, that they want the access to the slides as well. That's a great question. We will give you both versions. Therefore, you'll have the PowerPoint that you see here, and then you'll have the live recording, which has obviously the voiceover of Nikki and Abby to give you the context to go along with the slides. So you will receive both of those. Yes, indeed. Great question. Okay. Well, I think that calls it a wrap. We thank you so much. Look for us to have another one of these in August, actually. Our July one is going to be paused because we will be at our national conference in Los Angeles during that time. So we will do another one for on animal control. We have Scott Giacopo coming to talk about strategic animal control and the best ways to work with them to maximize impact and life saving as well. So thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your week.